My fifth travel series for the BBC along the Himalaya, and the idea was to start in the west and cross the Himalayas from west to east. So instead of just going north to south, as most people do, or some people do, one would investigate the whole range and the countries that bordered on that range. It was an epic journey. It was wonderful to do. It was turned into one of the most successful of the series, watched by several millions in the UK, which was because I know you all want to get away. It starts up in the northwest frontier area, a place called Concordia. I don't know if you've heard of Concordia. It's right up in the mountains. It's where two mighty glaciers, the Baltoro and the Godwin-Austen glaciers, pair off and flow down to the south. And in the background there you see the second highest mountain in the world, that is K2, in the day that we were up there. And I was taken up there by a military helicopter, by the Pakistan military, and he was going to sort of drop me off there, and I didn't realise he meant dropped, literally. Came round and was going to drop me off, and I was going to get out and walk up and say a piece to camera. But he actually never hit the ground, just the door opened, he pushed me out. So I sort of fell into the snow, which is an extremely bad way to start the series. But all the crew loved it, because they love to see a presenter make a fool of himself. But anyway, most glorious picture in the most glorious sort of part of the Himalayas. A great thing about the northwest part of Pakistan, where the Himalayas begin, they're part of several mountain chains, the Pamir, the Karakoram, the Hindu Kush. So all these mountains, which have been pushed up by the tectonic plates when India sort of crashed into Asia 50 million years ago, whatever it was. So it's very fine, wonderful, dramatic scenery. Anyway, I must hurry up because we've got lots to do. And there we are. You can just see, well, the way we were going was along the Himalaya. We ended up going into China, where the mountains sort of end and the Brahmaputra River curves round, and we followed that river right round to its mouth in Bangladesh. So I think about 9 countries we went to, all associated with the Himalaya, and all all depended really on the rain that falls up there and comes down and waters the countries and keeps the great rivers going. This is the Khyber Pass where we started. You know, the British this always has a joke about the Khyber Pass because it's rhyming slang in Cockney. Khyber Pass arse, you know. But I think that's just because they had a miserable time. These people were sent out. It was far too hot. They didn't know what they were doing there. But of course it is, it's the most stunning place to be, and the geography of this place. So you look out high over the mountains on either side of you, and this is really the gateway to the subcontinent. So many armies have come through here throughout history, and you realize how significant a geographical point the Khyber Pass is. There you see heavily guarded, and the road going off into Afghanistan in the distance. This is in Peshawar, and I enjoyed going to Peshawar. I liked it because it was a frontier town. It's the first big city that people would have come to over, you know, probably a couple of thousand years since its founding, as they came through the passes. And there are lots of wonderful streets in Peshawar. One of them is called Storyteller Street, because that's where people used to gather when they'd come through and tell stories of where they'd come from, where they'd been. And this was before television and all that, obviously. So the actual ability to tell a story and describe where you had been and where you'd travelled and what you'd seen was vitally important. And so there was a street dedicated to it. It also was there are at least 20 dentists all close together there. And, you know, in England, dentists are very discreet. They have a little plaque saying, you know, so-and-so, so-and-so, periodontal surgeon with some initials at the end. They certainly don't have teeth like that shown up. But I went in, and the man nearly pulled my teeth out, actually. I think he said he would do me fillings for, I think it was about 50 rupees. So I said, no, I'll come tomorrow, all right? Very, very sadly, Storyteller Street was bombed maybe about 10 years ago, and I'm told that a lot of the very old and beautiful houses with their galleries are now gone. So it's a bittersweet picture of that. And this is in Dara, which is right up in the tribal areas. And Dara Adam Khel is a place where they have always made guns. They made guns for the British Army. They were wonderful at sort of reproducing almost any gun of any kind. The James Bond firing pens they make in Dara. And they make almost nothing else. So as someone described it, Geoffrey Morehouse described it as the noisiest high street in the world, because everywhere is just a gun shop. So you see people come out with a gun and he sort of fires it, no, and goes in again, not my size, and comes out with another gun. And here, this gentleman, I mean, people think he's doesn't know how to use the gun, but he's actually checking exactly that the core in the barrel is exactly right. From Dara to Taxila, where we were the guests of a man called Prince Malik. And Prince Malik sort of very much lives a rather feudal life out in the countryside there, and is very keen to encourage local activities for his people there. It is quite a feudal thing, but he says all the old sports they used to do, he wants to keep going. He wants to make sure that sports like bull running are still going. Bull racing, thank you very much. So here we are all in our tent watching the bull racing. Later a bull actually came straight for the tent and we all had to leap up in the air. Get under the tent, he said, get under the tent. Anyway, so, bull racing, rather strange thing is, you know, two bulls are harnessed together. Two bulls who basically don't want to race. They just want to go somewhere and mate, or whatever bulls want to do. They certainly don't want to be chained together with another bloke and driven down towards the finishing line with a man on the back with a bit of sort of like a tin tray which he stands on, and he holds on as best he can, and it's almost impossible. As you can see, he falls off straight away, and very quickly after that, the ones we were seeing, the bull, unimpeded by the man at the back, managed to turn, unimpeded by the man at the back, they just turned and went straight through the crowd, none of whom seemed to worry. They all thought this was part of the excitement. So the bull shot off into the car park. But Prince Malik claimed he was the most successful event. And I think only one set of bulls actually got to the finishing line. So how the success is obviously not the competitive side. It was the fact no one was actually killed. This is up in the Kailash valleys, right up near Chitral. On our way to Chitral, which I found was one of the most beautiful places I'd ever been in my life, a wonderfully quiet place tucked away over the mountains. And we were with the Ul Mulk family, who are a dynasty who sort of run that part of the world. Very friendly people. They run a hotel called the Hindu Kush Heights, which has the most extraordinary view. Again, hemmed in by all the various mountains, a river running down, the green fields, and the little town of Chitral. At that time, they were all looking for, well, certain people were looking for Osama bin Laden, and they all thought he was in Chitral, and American Secret Service were there. And you could tell who they were. There was no secret. They're at least a foot taller than everybody else, with close-cropped hair and sort of white. So it was quite obvious who they were, and they didn't find anybody, but I expect they had a nice time in Chitral, as I did. But the Kailash valleys, that was interesting. There's a group of people, about 4,000 Kailash, who live in these remote valleys. This is the Rumba Valley. And some say they are descendants of Alexander the Great because they have blue eyes. And they're certainly very different from a lot of the people we saw on our journey. They're very open, they sort of look you straight in the eye and all that, and these girls are very happy to sort of pose on the wall here. And I taught at the school, gave them a little lesson on English, parts of the body we did with these children. They're absolutely fabulous, really, really wonderful, and all remarked on the size of my nose. Bunny Zum in the background, magnificent 23,000-foot peak, and in the foreground, one of the great joys of travelling through India and Pakistan, there's people playing cricket absolutely everywhere. And I think this must have the record for the highest cricket match ever in on our journey. It's about 15,000 feet there. The only problem is a really cracking six will go down 15,000 feet, and so it'll be about 4 days before you can get the ball back and restart the game. But they hadn't seemed to think of that. On the Chandur Pass, which is between Gilgit and Chitral, they have every year, I think twice in the year, a wonderful ceremony, a great polo game. And this is 12,000 feet up, so the pressure on the people and the horses is immense. But 12,000 people from the villages trek up to this mountain pass to watch the great polo game, and it's taken very, very seriously. And here we see the spectators on the members' stand, and there's the course. Again, breathtaking. This was really a feature of the entire journey through the Himalaya, was that almost everywhere we filmed, there were in the background, as you will see in some of these photos, extraordinarily powerful, magnificent, majestic mountain landscapes. And I think, I can't remember, well, here is another example. This is the Hunza Valley area. Again, I mean, there's very little scenery like this anywhere in the world. And the people living on these little bluffs there were villages. A lot of them, I think, were the Aga Khan, sort of part of his people living there, and they had invested heavily in the villages themselves, in looking after them, in properly providing fencing and walls, and it's all very tidy and neat. They're fairly poor people, but they're making a living for themselves in a very difficult part of the world, and they do make a living, and it's rather inspiring to see how they were able to do that. So that's the Hunza Valley. Now, will you know this? This is Shalimar Gardens. I think I was told originally 128 gardeners. I think there were only 2 on that day. One of them was trying to open the water spout, which had got a bit calcified, so he's having a go at that. And these beautiful gardens, and someone else mowing the lawn. I've never seen a buffalo-powered lawnmower before. This, I think, was impressive. I can't imagine if he goes into a gallop where he'd end up. But then 2 rather nice little pictures of life in Lahore in the Shalimar Gardens. We spent about 4 or 5 days in Lahore, went to the great mosques, filmed around the garden. We enjoyed being here greatly. It's a beautiful city, and that's partly why when Razi asked me to come and talk at the festival about 4 years ago, I said, Lahore, yes, well, I'd love to go back to Lahore. For 3 years, I wasn't able to do it. There were other things going on at that time, so I'm really delighted to be back here after about 14 years, I think it is. There's as you can see, the Golden Temple at Amritsar. We spent some time there. We investigated what was going on. Interesting how this vast operation works there. The people brought in, and the place provides accommodation. It provides food overnight for everybody for nothing. And I'm just quite impressed that a lot of the people working there were just a real cross-section of Sikhs everywhere. I mean, you know, road sweepers did their washing up next to surgeons and all that. So it's kind of rather interesting collective piece of charity at the Golden Temple. Rather different sort of building here. That's the Viceregal Lodge in Shimla. Sort of represented when the British Empire, I suppose, decided to take itself very seriously and begin to rule in a proper way with lots of carbon paper and all that sort of thing. And there were lots of people in here. And of course, the Viceregal Lodge, where the first talks, after only about 75 years after it was built, the first talks were made, which led to the breakup of and the foundation of India and Pakistan, all happened at the Viceregal Lodge there. And I'm told, I don't know, lots of people here know far more about it than I do, but that people arrived in cars, but Gandhi came on a bicycle. So things all started rather later while they waited. The Beatles once told me that. George Harrison said, you know, we used to do recording sessions, and it always starts late because Paul wanted to come on the bus. So there we are. There's a sort of always a a principal there. This is in Tibet. This is at the, I think it's on the medical center, where I had my horoscope read. They do take it very, very seriously. And I give them a lot of information, and they work out not just what life is going to be for me, but what I was in a previous life and what I would be, very importantly, reincarnated as. And I went for a consultation, and I was told I was an elephant in a previous life, which I quite like that. But it was what I was going to be reincarnated about rather worried me. I was going to be reincarnated as the daughter of a wealthy family somewhere in the West. And I thought, no, what does this mean? I mean, I'm going to be reborn as John Cleese's daughter in California or something like that, you know. So I'll stick with the elephant thing. I wish it had been the other way around, really. Can you hear all right? There's a bit of crackly. Okay, you can hear. Well, you're in the front row. Of course you can hear. What about those poor sods at the back, you know, then just come in. Still, you came early, that's the thing. Anyway. Met the Dalai Lama. I've met many inspiring people in my journeys, but he was very special. We went up to Dharamsala, and he received us there. And there were a number of people who were visiting him that day, television people, people filming, also a lot of refugees from Tibet who all lined up to be given their moment with the Dalai Lama. So he had a day's work, even by 3 o'clock when he was going to see us. And he was remarkable. He came in to the room, and we'd sort of set up, and he went straight to my film crew, the 6 of us, well, the 5 of my film crew, the technicians, and introduced himself to them and shook hands with all of them before saying hello to me. And then we sat down, and we had a very, you obviously in good mood, we had a very comedic conversation. I was going to be asking, I thought, serious things about world peace, and he was anxious to tell me that he was jet-lagged after a visit to America. And you know, jet lag, some people have it in the head. Head, fine, but stomach, oh, 9:30, I get up every morning. And I said, thank you very much, Your Holiness. That's all we need to know there. He said he wanted to come on my journeys with me. He would have been a wonderful companion, because he was just so brilliant with people, so easy and informal and interested in them without it having to be put on. Anyway, maybe I got him on a good day. This is Dal Lake up in Kashmir. We spent some time there. Nice thing about Dal Lake, the outboard motors have been banned, so it's fairly quiet apart from the ripple of water and the human voice. Very, very noisy here in the market. So if you're going to go and buy your vegetables on Dal Lake, that's where you get them, at the floating market. After that, one of these lovely houseboats, which I'm told were actually built based on the barges held by the Oxford colleges on the river Cherwell in Oxford. And so that's why they look the way they did. They're all high Victorian, they were built in the 70s, 1870s that is, and reproduced here, probably by homesick Brits dreaming of their college days. And this was a place also where, going back to the Beatles again, and George Harrison, who became a great friend, came here to work with Ravi Shankar and learnt to play the sitar in one of the houseboats here. The situation in Srinagar was bad then. There were periodic times when it was all settled down, but the bomb had gone off just a few days before we got there. And this was certainly a theme of our trip through Kashmir. Not just that, but the presence of armies, the military, and very, very sad that such a beautiful land, such a beautiful place was suffering so much. But I put that in so it shows you the reality of our journey, not just the beauty of it. And this is a wonderful, this was up in Ladakh, and he clearly crashed and was waiting, not quite sure who for, the rescue people to come, probably in about 6 weeks' time. And the rather sad thing is that there were lovely road safety campaign had been set up, and along the road in Ladakh there were little signs, rather homely, like after whiskey, driving risky. Drive like hell, you'll be there. And better be Mr. Late than the late Mr. That one had been knocked over by the truck, actually, which hit it It's rather sad, but I do I do love those wonderful signs that you find along the roadside and in the fields as travelling up through India. This is in we're in Nepal now, rushing along near. You can see Annapurna in the background, and this was a small village where we filmed, and actually had quite a hairy time because this was during the Maoist insurgency, and we were actually the leaders of our expedition were well, they weren't exactly kidnapped, but the Maoists came out of the forest nearby and said, "Can we talk to your director and the person who's leading you?" And there was an English lieutenant who was with us. Oh, sorry, that's probably him now. Can I just take this? I'll better take it later, actually. And they were taken off into the forest and didn't return that night. And for a while, it was very, very serious. And they didn't return for about 2 days. And we can just see it's a beautiful, beautiful village. What they were doing at that time was a Gurkha recruiting session, where they go into the villages and they get these young men and put them through the most extraordinary, tough exercises to prove their physical fitness. And I mean, I think about, in this village, about 280 young men came along to join the Gurkhas, and only about 40 were deemed fit enough to go to the next stage of the examinations for the Gurkhas. So that was going on. In the meantime, there's our wonderful sort of English kit that he's wearing, the little shorts, and he was kidnapped later, as I say, and it was about, it was about 3 days before we could actually get anyone through to the area. And he was eventually released, and apparently people were punished by the Maoist leader for doing this, because it was a time when they were trying to negotiate to play a part in government. But all I can remember is that we realized he'd been kidnapped, and we got down to the valley, and as soon as we got out of the village, because we were extremely unpopular there, someone rang up the British embassy to tell them what had happened, and they said, "Oh, I'm sorry, he's having lunch." We said, "Well, it's actually, I think you ought to know. No, it's Sunday lunch, so he definitely can't be disturbed." He was eventually disturbed. This is in Nepal, Patan. Probably doesn't look like that anymore since the earthquake. Extraordinary how things have changed in the very short time since we went there. But they're very beautiful buildings there. I love the collection of different kinds of architecture. The pagodas, which are said to have been invented in Nepal. Pagodas and the newer architecture as well. Very, very beautiful. This was just before we crossed over the Himalaya from Kathmandu up into Tibet. And we found this amazing game of snooker going on. And probably the worst place to put a snooker table. You can just see there's sort of boulders all around it. You know, so it's sort of extremely sort of likely that you'll end up with a landslide. But there they are, happily playing on. Here we are up in Rongbuk Monastery. This is with Everest in the background. I suppose the one place you really want to see if you're going through the Himalaya. We were in a guest house called the Rongbuk Guest House there. And this is the highest monastery in the Himalaya. And while we were there, we had these very, very striking views of Everest. And this is the north face of Everest, which wasn't climbed until 1960, when it was climbed by the Chinese, I think. And for a long time, the Chinese wouldn't let anybody else get to the north face of Everest. But it is very dramatic, and this was where in the 1920s, just after the First World War, there were a series of expeditions. Mallory and Irvine were the two climbers who in 1924 may have got to the summit of Everest. No one knows if they did. They were seen disappearing into clouds at the very, very top of the peak there, and they may have been the first two to get to the top of Everest. Still, people are looking for a camera that may have been on that expedition, which would prove it one way or the other. But anyway, spectacular place to look at, and also to remember and imagine those extraordinary stories of the people who had tried to get to Everest over the years. Apparently in the 1930s, there was a time when people tried to get to Everest by any means possible. And one man took a plane, crashed it into the side of Everest, and thought he'd walk up the rest. But I think actually never survived the crash. Sorry, I don't mean to laugh. That's terrible. There we are, making our way towards Everest. Here we are. This is one of the great buildings that we saw, Potala Palace, and where the Dalai Lama, of course, was born, and someone there in the front. It's a spectacular building. Apparently, it was the tallest building in the world before skyscrapers were actually built. This is the northernmost part we got to was the mountains near Namtso Lake in Tibet, and you can see the prayer flags everywhere on the top of the mountains, prayers being flown out across the mountains there. And there was the hot springs up there, Namtso Lake. I say it was the furthest north we went. Everywhere around was bitterly cold, but it's a lovely warm pool into which I swam. And I also met a man called Sonam, who was a yak herder, and this was in Yushu in Tibet, which actually is a little bit further north than Namtso. And he had agreed to talk to us with his family, and we thought a yak herder, a farmer, it'd be nice to just find out how they live and all that. And Sonam had put on a suit for the day. It was, unfortunately, I haven't got a picture of him. He looked very, very dashing, and he was on his motorbike, and he drove me around and took me to his yurt, and there we had a wonderful conversation together. I couldn't speak his language, he couldn't speak my language, but there were two children there, and we just sat down and we talked about the children and what they were doing and the way they were moved and what they were saying, and it was almost exactly the same as children anywhere in the world. There was one who was trying to be terribly nice because the other one was being a misery and all that. And we had this conversation. I realized we talked for about 15 minutes without either of us understanding the actual words, but knowing exactly what we were talking about. And he then asked me his wife asked me to go and help make butter. So there I am, making butter. This was something rather important on our journeys, to experience what's going on at the local level. And indeed, there I am milking a yak, or a dree, actually, which is the female of a yak, a dree. So I was milking a dree. Tiger Leaping Gorge. This is on our way into to China. This is quite spectacular. You can just see that on the side of the slope there. You see the little path cuts through, and it's 3,000 feet down into where the Yangtze flows through this terrific gorge. And there's a place called the Halfway House, which is spectacular, and it says it prides itself on having how's it called itself? Most famous toilet in heaven and earth, it says. And the toilet is actually slung out over the gorge. I mean, utterly terrifying. And I went there, and I couldn't make any movements at all. So I just pretended. I said, yes, thank you very much. I can see why it's such a spectacular lavatory. The gorge there, rather like the Yangtze lower down, where the gorge has been flooded for the great reservoir and the dam. There is a likelihood, I heard, that this was going to be also flooded, in which case you wouldn't see the spectacular sights that we were seeing as we walked along through Tiger Leaping Gorge. Now, this is in Kunming. I think it must be the furthest east that we got to, and they're sort of very keen on tribal identities there, and this is called a tribal park. So lots of people from all the various tribes around there got together, and they all had their little section in the park. And that's in, I say, near Kunming. We then turned south and back towards the west, following the Brahmaputra that turns round, and the next time we found ourselves here we are in Burma, on the borders of Burma and India. And this the headhunters there, the Naga people. And I don't think they're still headhunters, but apparently if you've got any teeth on your necklace, it means that you have hunted a head at some time. Whether he has hunted all these people, their heads, I don't know, whether he just got it headhunting shop or something like that. But anyway, they're wonderfully good-natured people and fantastic tattoos. I mean, David Beckham, forget it. This man's stomach is quite wonderful. And there we are comparing stomachs. My rather pallid little pink stomach with nothing written on it at all, so I'm afraid to say. Just so you know, I have no tattoos. And this is right on the border with Burma and India. And this is the Baptist church. Missionaries have got into Nagaland over the last 50 years. They built the churches. What was quite significant there's a football match between India and Burma, and they were not allowed to have any contact, certainly no sporting contact on an official level, but here they were actually playing football against each other. It shows again somehow that how sport can actually change things and can make connections which politics can never do. So I was quite sort of amazed by that, and they're very, very, very friendly with each other, whatever the politicians might have said. And this is going down the Brahmaputra. Everywhere on this particular journey, everywhere there was public transport, it's absolutely packed. And everyone sort of crammed onto this riverboat going down there. And I was taken to a tea plantation, and here we are on the elephants going through, I think it's Mankotta tea plantation. The BBC insisted, for insurance reasons, that I wear a helmet when riding elephants. And I said, I can't do that. It looks so ridiculous, you know. No one else was. And so this was strictly, the BBC would be very, very cross if they did. Well, they did see it eventually, but I'm not sure they saw this, me walking through there. But, I mean, there are certain times when you have to override the insurance people at home just to get the feeling of well, what it's like to ride an elephant, the feeling of freedom up there. In the Kaziranga National Park nearby, I don't know if any of you have ever been to Kaziranga, but it's the problem in the area there is that there are a lot of elephants in the park, and they actually are trying to preserve the number of elephants. But a lot of the local people resent the preservation of elephants because the elephants come and trample over their crops, knock down their houses, and cause damage in their villages. So they have set up a sort of educational program to try and persuade people that elephants are really very, very, well, they are wonderful creatures, we all know that. But they're not something to be feared. One can get on with them, and look, they even play football. I'm not quite sure that was a good idea, but anyway, there's the elephant. There was an elephant football game going on there. Whether it's changed people's minds or not about elephants, I don't really know, but they were trying to do their best for it there. I also got to bathe an elephant, which is not something that everybody gets the chance to do. And I was very apprehensive because this is a big bull elephant with enormous tusks. And so I just sort of flipped a bit of water on and then thought, well, that should be okay. I said, no, you've got to rub them hard. They love being rubbed, their skin being rubbed. So I thought, really? So I got a little bit nearer and sort of, again, this massive creature there. And I just sort of rubbed it a little bit. No, they said, up the end of the tusk. That's where the tusk meets the cheek. That is where elephants love to be bathed. So I thought, no, right up top of the tusk. And as I did that, there was an extraordinary noise from the elephants going, ooh, whoa, no, whoa, whoa. And it reminded me of one of those sort of pictures you've seen, photos you've seen of colonels in the Raj days sitting in a great big bath with someone, oh yes, a little bit more, Palin, under there, yes, oh, rub under there, please, we love that. Anyway, that was my elephant rubbing days. That's the great thing about traveling the world. You can say you've done some very, very strange things. I was once, I shouldn't really tell you this, probably isn't time. How are we doing? All right. Oh, okay, we're good, actually, yes. The things you have to do, and I was in the Amazon, and we got to a Machigenga village, a native village, and there was a tributary of the Amazon called the Urubamba, and we stopped and went into the village to meet the people there. And as I got to the outskirts of the village, two old ladies with broad smiles were there, offering me gourds with a sort of orangey pink liquid in them, and bidding me to drink. So I thought, fine, yes. So I had a drink. I mean, you have to. It's a sign of hospitality. I had to respond, so I drank that. And they all smiled a lot, and I drank a bit more, and they were broad smiles. And it turned out that what this was palm wine, which had been specially prepared for a festival of St. John. The missionaries had been there as well. And they helped to make this wine. And I was talking to my guide, and my guide said, oh yes, you know, it's so important, this festival, you have this special wine, that actually very often half the sugar crop of the entire village over a year can be cut down just to create this wine for this particular festival day. And I said, oh, that's really interesting. So I thought, I'll have a bit more, thank you very much. And their smiles were so wonderfully broad. And then there was a bit of conversation. My guide said, oh, yes, no. What they say is that apparently when there is no sugar around the village, the wine is fermented by the saliva of the old ladies of the village. So I stopped for a moment and I asked, is much sugar grown around here? No. So I suddenly realized why the smiles were quite as broad as they were. Anyway, so we suddenly switched to the Amazon. We should be in India. This is in Bhutan, which I think is the only Buddhist kingdom in the world, and that's a lot of buildings are decorated there, and I wondered what this was, and this is apparently a weasel dropping pearls of wisdom. So you find these on just the ordinary houses there. I was quite impressed with Bhutan in a way. It's obviously deliberately tried to keep its old traditional values. The houses that were built in the old traditional way, the costumes, they still wore, I mean, national dress was something you wore every day. And it was a very, very beautiful country. I think probably they have a policy of keeping out people who are non-Bhutanese quite firmly. But it was one of the highlights. So I walked down from a great mountain called Jomalhari down to Paro. I think we've got a picture of, there's the mountain, there's Jomalhari. I say, everywhere we went, there were these spectacular backdrops. And you can see some buildings there. This used to be an area where goods were brought over. People still traded through the mountains during that, well, for many hundreds of years, found their way, snaked their way through. I don't know what happened to the village here, but it was obviously a place where people received goods. There were traders there. And there's a Jomalhari in the background. Near Jomalhari, I met a gentleman who was a poet and a farmer. And he had written a love poem to a yak. And this had been put to music and had become very successful and had gone to the top of the hit parade in Bhutan. And the king had sort of specially asked him to go and sing it. And so I asked him, would he please sing this song to me? So he sang a couple of verses of this lovely love song to a yak. And then he turned to me turned to my guide and said something, and the guide said, oh yes, now he wants you to sing a love song from England. And I thought, a love song from England? I couldn't think of a single song. I was so unprepared for this. So the only thing I could think of was to sing the Lumberjack song from Monty Python, as if it were a love song. So I sort of tried to get away. I cut down trees, I eat my lunch, I go to the lavatory. On Wednesdays I go shopping and have buttered scones for tea. I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay. I sleep all night and I work all day. He thought it was very moving. Well, actually, he thought, thank you very much, thank you. He clearly wanted me to get off his mountain as quickly as possible. Lovely old, he was 84 years old. And this is one of the great ceremonies that they have, wonderful dances, usually for the dead, down in Paro itself. The monks, they're all dressed up, very spectacular music. always done with a great deal of colour and panache in Bhutan. This is now in Sylhet. This is in Bangladesh. We've crossed into Bangladesh. And these mansions are sort of jammed one next to each other, but everyone's sort of trying to cap the other one in size and grandeur and number of columns and classical references and all that. And these are people, I'm told, who've made their fortunes in Birmingham and have come back to Bangladesh with so much money that they can't build a house big enough. And there was this great street of mansions in Bangladesh. And here's the shipbreaking yard at Chittagong. This was a very strange and weird place. All these great liners and cruise ships, you can see them out there in the background, waiting to come in and be taken apart in the most. I mean, I think in Pakistan you have shipbreaking, and I'm not sure what the conditions are like, but it's very, very tough. And people are working without really any proper protection of any kind, just firing away, trying to smash up these ships. And the whole beach is just littered with parts of boats. And then they're all sort of, there is some method in it. All the various parts of the ships are sort of gathered together and sold in various parts of the world to various people, or you can buy them there in Chittagong, like you can buy your own toilet there, hundreds of them in a market in Chittagong. The last part of our journey through the Himalaya was down following the Brahmaputra to its mouth near the Sundarban Islands. And this is in Dhaka, and we were just getting ready to leave. And it's just one of those little things. You see everybody working and you feel we're just doing our work and nobody really notices. And obviously they were aware that we were going, and they just sort of stopped. These are guys just getting sand off and putting them on, restocking them onto the boat, just stopped and gave a wave as we went off. As always happens with travellers, and we were travellers really, there's always somebody to wave you away wherever you're going, and these guys, as I say, stopped work as we set off down the Brahmaputra. This is a very ancient boat called the Ostrich, and the Ostrich is part of a service called the Rocket Service. It doesn't really travel like a rocket, it's a lot slower, but it goes down the river, and it's an old paddle steamer. And these designs were first, I think it was first made in 1929. And rather than just get rid of them, I mean, in our sort of world, in very often they just get rid of anything that's over 5 years old. But this was fit for purpose, so they just changed the engines a few times. But basically you are going down this wonderful stretch of river through the Sundarban Islands in this great steamer with its lovely decks and music on board and everything. It's something I can thoroughly recommend. It only goes a certain way down. It doesn't go all the way to the Bay of Bengal. You have to go switch onto another boat. And here we are on a fishing boat, taking us the last few miles through the mangrove swamps to the Bay of Bengal. And I must say, it was on this fishing boat we had one of the best meals on the whole of the Himalaya trip. And what he did was they just went to various fishermen and asked them what they'd caught. And they would show them a bit of fish. They no, we'll have that, but not that. And they must have gone to about 5 or 6 different fishermen, got it all together, and on this little boat with hardly a galley at all, just a sort of little place in the stern there, produced this most beautiful, beautiful sort of fish stew. As I say, one of the finest meals I had on the whole journey. And fitting climax, really, to our journey. There we are, going out onto the Bay of Bengal, the sun beginning to set. A spectacular journey. I can't remember how many thousand miles we did, but it was entirely sort of, as I say, a geographical journey, following rivers, going through mountain passes and all that. Some of the experiences we had were very, very moving. Others were quite hilarious. So there's one in the Annapurna, when we're going up to Annapurna. It's a very steep climb, and I had actually got a cold, a very bad chest cold before I started, and so the altitude was kicking in as well. There was less air for me to breathe, less oxygen, so it was pretty unpleasant going. And I got to the a place where there was a sort of line of about 15, 20 stone steps going up the path, and I was just wheezing, wondering if I could make it. And I noticed there were two Western women at the top, and one nudged her friend and pointed down, said, "Look, look." And I thought, oh God, I've been recognized. I'm going to have to try and get up there, you know, sort of looking fairly nimble. So I dragged myself up the steps, walked past them as heroically as I could. And as I walked by, I heard one woman say to the other, "Oh my God, it's Eric Idle." So there we are. You take what you can. Anyway, there we are. That's the end of the journey through the Himalayas. I'm sorry I've gone rather quickly for you. I know we've got a bit more time. And if anybody would like to ask any questions, do we have some more time? Anyone want to ask questions? Or would you like me just to sort of go? 5 minutes. Oh, go. Oh, no. And I learned a lot. I learned about countries I didn't know about. Bangladesh, for instance, and Pakistan, both eye-openers, because one didn't know a lot about those countries, and there was a sort of feeling abroad, oh, well, you don't want to go there, it's dangerous, or Bangladesh is very poor. And both those ridiculous myths, you know, Bangladesh is incredibly rich, and Pakistan has a wonderful, vital, lively energy to it, you know, and I've made some very great friendships here. So it was just as well I went.